We've been using EOS as an organization, which at this point we're about 600 employees strong, since about 2009, 2010. At that point, the broader organization, again, the accounting group, et cetera, that was about 100-ish people. And I know they really felt at that juncture they had sort of hit the proverbial glass ceiling. And it was really more of a shareholder-led organization as opposed to a leadership-led organization. And so EOS at the organization level was really a step in terms of trying to professionalize the organization, how it was run, bring more accountability, create more of a cohesive and aligned vision for the group. And then I would say from within wealth, that's also been pivotal. And I'm sure we'll unpack that more specifically on the wealth management side.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSalle here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we have a guest today, Matt Cosgriff. And before I tee him up and welcome him to the show, I just wanted to mention that Matt had actually listened to our show and reached out on his own to be a guest on the podcast. And it just serves as a reminder for all of you who are listening, if you feel as if you would be a great guest, or if you feel as if someone in your world would be a great guest, we're always open to those introductions. Over the last year or so, we've had a variety of folks from financial advisors to outside coaches and consultants to other industry vendors on the podcast. And in 2023, what you'll notice is we're going to have a heavy focus on having financial advisors themselves on the show almost exclusively. So if you're an advisor and you have a story that you'd like to share, a process or a strategy that you think would be helpful to the community, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can just shoot me an email at david@modelfa.com, and more than happy to have an intro call. But with that being said, Matt Cosgriff, he's the director of wealth management over at BerganKDV, and they're a $2 billion firm. And we'll unpack that a little bit more on the show here today. But we're going to be talking about EOS, which is from the book Traction. And we had some clients of ours on, John and Matt, a while ago, and they talked about EOS and implementing that into their firm. And at the time, I want to say they're at like 120 or so million in AUM. So if you're a similar size to them, perhaps that motivated you to implement EOS into your business. But EOS is applicable regardless of the size of the business. So I thought it would be cool, and so did Matt today, would be cool to unpack how EOS has had an impact on their firm, even at $2 billion in assets. So without further ado, Matt, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David, for having me. Really excited to be here. As you mentioned, I have listened to the podcast for a long time and thought the perspective we could hopefully bring just with regard to EOS would be helpful to you and the listeners. So excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So before we get into EOS specifically, how'd you get into the industry initially, and kind of walk us through your career path up to being the director of wealth management at BerganKDV?
Yeah, my high school hockey coach was actually a branch director at RBC. So I'd always kind of known about this whole financial advice world. And it wasn't until college when I got an internship, or was fortunate enough to get an internship, that I really fell in love with the profession. I think just the ability that we can have positively on people's lives was something that I was immediately drawn to. So like a lot of things in life, it comes down to timing. So I graduated from a small liberal arts school in southern Minnesota, and was fortunate enough to come out of there and join a small registered investment advisory firm right out of school. Got thrown right into the fire, right? Sort of wearing a lot of different hats at a small firm, which was amazing just in terms of development. And then about going almost 9 years ago, joined BerganKDV. At the time, had stepped into BerganKDV really with the aspiration of trying to build out sort of a next-gen financial planning solution, similar to what a lot of the great work that the Exploit Planning Network is doing. And then about 4.5 years ago, stepped into my current role, which is leading our broader wealth management group within what is essentially a regional professional services firm, and happy to dive deeper into that. But I've kind of grown up on the wealth side, and then also spent a little bit of time on the corporate retirement plan consulting side of the business. And again, excited to be here chatting with you.
Nice. Are you client facing at all still, or are you primarily advisor facing within the firm?
Yeah, good question. At this point, I would say I've done, it's taken a long time, but I've managed to get most of my day-to-day client responsibilities delegated off to my team. We have a great team. And so I probably still work with maybe 10 retirement plans, and let's just call it just under 10 individual clients. I think as a leader, having still a foot in the game, if you will, is important just so I stay sharp, I stay attuned to client needs and things like that. But the predominant chunk of my role at this point is really leading and managing the business.
Okay, cool. And so you guys have $2 billion in assets. Roughly how many advisors help manage those assets?
Yeah, we probably have about 9 advisors. And the $2 billion includes both corporate retirement plan consulting assets and then also individual wealth assets. Our team is about 31 people. Again, about a third of those being kind of on the advisor side, and then the rest being anything from compliance, investments, operations, financial planning, tax, et cetera.
Well, I'm impressed with the lean and mean infrastructure. Oftentimes, when people have that level of assets, they're doing so with like 60 or 70 people. So it kind of hopefully goes to show with a system like EOS, you can be a lot more efficient with some lower body count, so to speak, with folks that are required to help manage a business of that size. So excited to unpack that some more. When you first started with BerganKDV, do you remember roughly what the AUM was at that time? I just want to get a sense over the 9-year period, what that growth has looked like.
I don't know the exact number. I want to say we were probably just under $1 billion or maybe like right at it. I'm pretty sure we would have been under $1 billion though. Again, it seems in some respects like it was just yesterday. In other respects, it was, it was a long time ago. I can tell you within the last 5 years though, we probably added 600 to 700 million maybe in the last 5 years or so. So we've seen some pretty dramatic growth in the last 5 years, especially. Now, admittedly, part of that's obviously market, but we've had some pretty strong organic growth and some small M&A as well.
Awesome. Now, was EOS already implemented before you joined, or did it happen sometime after? When was that actually plugged into the operational side of the business?
EOS was already in place when I joined, so I can't take any credit for that decision. We've been using EOS as an organization, which at this point we're about 600 employees strong, since about 2009, 2010. At that point, the broader organization, again, the accounting group, et cetera, that was about 100-ish people. And I know they really felt at that juncture, they had sort of hit the proverbial glass ceiling. And it was really more of a shareholder-led organization as opposed to a leadership-led organization. And so EOS at the organization level was really a step in terms of trying to professionalize the organization, how it was run, bring more accountability, create more of a cohesive and aligned vision for the group. And then I would say from within wealth, that's also been pivotal. And I'm sure we'll unpack that more specifically on the wealth management side.
Well, and you skipped over that point quickly, but I want to emphasize because you just did a good job of jogging my memory from our first call that we had. But BerganKDV's wealth management side is only a piece of the business. You guys have a sister company that's filled with a ton of accountants, correct?
Yeah, so BerganKDV actually dates back to the 1940s. So it really started as a traditional small town accounting firm up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Our current CEO was actually the firm's first intern back in 1984. And
for the
first 60 or so years, it was really just traditional accounting. And it wasn't in 2000 then the firm started to really diversify. Dave, our current CEO, grew up on the accounting side, continued to see all these clients, brokers, advisors make a trade in December, right? And would blow up 11 months of tax planning. And nobody's trying to do anything malicious, right? It's just the left and the right hand didn't necessarily know what the other was doing. And so he actually had the foresight at the time to go about and launch the wealth business. So today we're about 600 employees strong across the Midwest. Tax and tax consulting is a huge part of our business. It's probably 50 or 60% in terms of revenue and headcount. But we also help business owners with payroll, technology. Obviously, I'm the leader of the wealth management group.
Okay, cool. So let's dive into EOS. So for those folks who are listening that keep asking themselves so far in the podcast, what the heck is EOS and what does that stand for? Can you just give us a brief overview as to what it is, and then we'll talk about how you guys leverage it inside the business?
Yeah, I think succinctly, EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And that's really what it is. It's an operating system to run a business. It's a common language for employees to talk about the vision, the strategy, the execution of the business and effectively bring accountability and clarity around how do we accomplish whatever it is as an organization we're setting out to. Even more simply, it's really just a framework, right? So, and there's kind of 6 core components: vision, data, people, process, traction. I think issues is the 6th one, which again, we can unpack that further. But on a high level, that's what it is. It's a language, it's a framework to move our business forward together.
Now, I know just in helping others roll out this process and using it ourselves too, I know that there's like a cadence of meetings, right? You have your quarterly rocks meetings, which is typically a few hours or half a day. Even some folks do it offsite with some, drinks afterwards and whatnot. And then you have your weekly level 10 meetings as sort of like progress updates. So I guess what I'm curious to understand is, with having the accounting company and the wealth management company, are you bringing in leaders and executives from both organizations for one sort of EOS focus, or are both of those companies utilizing EOS separately? How is that structured?
Yeah. So Dave, I mentioned our CEO, when he stepped into that role about 5 years ago, really the vision was to take what have historically been sort of cousin companies, in the sense we're all related, we're all sort of loosely rowing in the same direction, but there were silos. And the vision at the time was to sort of break those silos down and really become one firm for the betterment of our clients and our team members. I think EOS has certainly played a part in that. The executive level, they use EOS. They're the only group that uses an implementer at this point. It's pretty ingrained in our culture. So a lot of the leaders across the firm don't necessarily need an implementer to run an L10 or a quarterly. But to your question, at this point, we are really a fairly tight-knit organization in terms of operations, and EOS, I think, is a part of that. So each vertical or each solution, whether it be wealth or tax, they use EOS in their different business units to run their practice, create accountability. And then each of those business units reports up through, essentially in my case, my manager, and we use EOS. So each of the different business unit heads sits in that meeting. And again, that all kind of rolls up. So I do think EOS has allowed us to, again, have one broader vision as an organization, have sort of more distilled down visions within each of those different business units, and then to try to keep those cohesive and in alignment, which is, again, not easy. I'm not suggesting we're perfect at it by any stretch, but I think it has helped in that process.
Understood. Okay. What have you noticed? And granted, it was implemented before you joined the firm 9 years ago, but I'm sure you can kind of compare the process that you guys go through with EOS compared to other businesses that you were involved with prior to BerganKDV. What do you notice in terms of like the impact that it actually has on getting stuff done? Because I don't know, I come across, both advisors and business owners in general, where a lot of them have really good ideas and they're stuck on the idea list for quite some time. So help me understand kind of your experience in prior companies that maybe didn't use it compared to this company that does use it. Talk to us about the impact that it has, and perhaps an example or two of like an initiative that, actually got done because of being plugged into the system.
First and foremost, EOS is really a framework to help execute, right? I would say it does lack in terms of the strategic side, and that's something, if we want, we can unpack. But in terms of your question, it really does help move the needle. I'll give some examples of how that kind of transpires. You mentioned earlier the L10, right? Which is, for those that aren't familiar, that's basically just like our weekly meeting, right? So we have an advisor one, we've got a wealth leadership one, operations, each of the different teams has one. And in those meetings, the intent is to try to bring issues, identify, discuss, and solve. And the solve could be any combination of things. Oftentimes it's a to-do. Then that goes into, basically, we've got it built out in Microsoft Teams where that to-do then is there. And the goal is to basically get 90% of your to-dos done on time. So right there, that weekly cadence, the person has a to-do, they come back the next week. In theory, they've got to answer for it, right? Because it's going to be on the list and they're going to go around and say, done, not done. And so I think just something as simple as that, right? Because if we don't have that, what it ends up happening is you're in a meeting, it's like, oh yeah, I'll do that thing. And then nobody writes it down and it gets thrown away in the paper when you clean up at night. And so I think just it's not anything, nothing about EOS is sexy or sophisticated. It's all just back to the basic stuff. I'll give you a more specific example as it relates to rocks, which again, for those that aren't familiar, those are going to be sort of your quarterly to-dos. Those are going to be the big sort of meaty things that you need to get done. One of the things that's a big initiative of ours, which ties to our 1-year plan, is updating our fee schedule. And so that gets broken out into rocks. People have those. And then in each of those weekly L10s, people have to say on track or off track on whether or not you're moving that forward. I mean, it's okay to say off track, right? Like, hey, I'm having this issue. But I think that weekly cadence that ties to those 90-day rocks, but then ties to your 1-year plan, which then ties to 3-year vision. It's that like cohesiveness that really allows organizations, frankly, I would argue at any size, to move the needle on, again, getting stuff done ultimately.
I appreciate that you shared it because I was about to, but like EOS isn't complicated, or as you said, it's not overly sophisticated. It's just a lot of times, especially companies of your size, when you include the accounting side as well, like a lot of people can be running around feeling like they're getting stuff done. And then you quickly realize, oh, none of the initiatives that we had discussed at the beginning of the year actually get done. So I like the simplicity of it, but I want to emphasize the fact that the simplicity doesn't take away from the effectiveness of the system. I do want to emphasize one point too, where when you think of these quarterly rocks, right, these bigger initiatives, whenever I talk with folks about EOS, I say, those rocks, to use another analogy, is sort of like an elephant, and you're charged with having to eat that elephant, and it can seem overwhelming. Yep. So instead, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So I think it's important to note that those larger initiatives, we need to pick apart and say, okay, well, what are the 10 things or however many things that are needed to get that over the goal line? And you either divvy that up, or you as the individual who owns that rock, now every week you're taking a bite out of that. And then before you know, at the end of the quarter, you've completed the initiative at hand. So we just encourage people, if you're already using EOS or if you're not and you're considering it, don't let those rocks overwhelm you. Break it up into the itty bitty pieces that are required to actually get there. I would imagine you guys do something similar.
Yeah, very much so. And I would even take it a step further to say we'll do that in terms of if the proverbial elephant is the 1-year plan, right? If we have big initiatives, which we do, we've got like 5 or 6 core initiatives this year that we're focusing on. Each quarter, we look at those and say, okay, well, what do we need to do next to move the ball on that initiative? And that's where you can translate those into rocks, kind of to your point where you're breaking that out. So I think trying to connect the rocks then to the larger future vision is something else that, again, it's not anything super sophisticated, but it's just having that really simple process and getting people ingrained in that, so they're all speaking the same language, which is really where we found, a lot of value in that.
While we're on the rocks conversation, one of my clients who just recently rolled out EOS to the company, one thing he was struggling with, and I'd be curious to know how you guys handle this internally. One of the things he was struggling with is, does he assign his team members the particular rocks, or does he have them come up with them, on their own? And his fear is, or was at the time, that they're going to come up with something that is part of their day-to-day already, but they think it's a rock in their mind, and wanting to make sure that they're focusing on like actual strategic initiatives and not just making a big deal out of the tasks that they're required to do anyways. How do you guys balance this is what we want to do as a company, but we need to get the buy-in from the people actually doing the things, whatever those things are. So do you assign rocks to people? Do they give their input? If they give their input and it's not in alignment with what you were hoping they would choose, how do you give that feedback? Like, how do you deal with all that stuff? Because you got humans involved and sometimes they can be unpredictable. So how do you think through that?
Yeah. There's two really interesting parts of that. So the first, how do you sign rocks or do you not? I think it's a great question. I would say the EOS system sort of almost inherently gets teams to the most important things, right? So when you're doing that quarterly, everybody's supposed to bring what are the top issues facing the organization that we can have an impact on in the next 90 days. So inherently, you're getting people to think strategically. You're getting people to think about what are those big things. You get that generally, and we just use, frankly, a spreadsheet. You just prioritize those. And generally, you just do a keep, kill, or combine. So keep, we want to talk about it and eventually translate it to some action. Kill, it's not that important. We're not aligned. We don't need to touch it. Or combine, obviously, it's duplicative. So that exercise then hones in on like, what are the 5 to 10 core things that are impacting whatever group might be going through that quarterly, And inherently, that kind of almost forces those things to come to the surface and people to set rocks around them. Now, again, it's not magic. So absolutely what you asked about, what happens if somebody takes one that's maybe not truly a rock? We see that probably more with our advisor groups. And what we've really tried to focus them on is you don't need to take like an extra credit rock just to say you have a rock. Like your rock could literally, if the most important thing the next 90 days is to meet with your 15 best clients, turn that as a rock. I don't know how EOS pure that is. The value we see in that is it really gets people focused in on, if that's the most important thing, let's get it on the board and let's have it be a rock so you can bring focus and attention to it, check in on it weekly. I would say pretty infrequently do we see people taking rocks that are just like, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense. But I think that's, because we've used EOS so long, because we have great leaders, is probably part of that.
So that's one thing, and all that makes sense. But the last scenario that you shared about if their initiative is to meet with their top 15, best clients, right? I guess that doesn't sit overly well with me. And the reason being is because, well, you're an advisor and you should be meeting with your clients anyways. So like to me, it kind of comes off as like a cop out, whereas instead, let's say, they need to refine and elevate their client experience. That's something that's not done every single day, right? So it's like, maybe I interpret EOS as more of like helps you get things done that normally wouldn't get done. How do you balance that? Because I don't know, maybe I'm misthinking about it and I don't mean to push too much, but like, I feel like something like that is a cop out. It's like, well, if you look at the job description of a financial advisor, your job is to meet with clients. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on me pushing back a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Maybe that was a poor example. Let me give you a different one. Let's say an advisor has a goal to bring in 150,000 in new revenue, right? And let's say it's halfway through the year and they're at 45,000, right? So they're behind. Probably a more common rock in that scenario would be meet with 25 COIs. And again, I'm just kind of making these up on the fly.
Okay.
Something that's hyper focused on action that can be done in the next 90 days that's going to move you closer to your 1-year goal. So yeah, the meet with 15 clients, that's probably, I would say, is totally reasonable pushback. Another example might be meet with 15 clients and ask for a referral, right? Like things that are, yeah, you should be doing them, but that specific action is going to move you closer to your 1-year goal as an advisor. That's where we're trying to get. Because what we've seen, the alternative is sometimes it'll be like, oh, I'm going to take a rock to like work on our compliance process. Well, that's kind of outside the scope. So to your question about taking rocks that maybe aren't like really in their scope or really in the interest of moving forward on their goals, that's maybe where we're trying to get more of having them be like exclusively advisor focused on stuff that they're amazing at. And we want to help them get closer to their goals.
Okay. So what you said helped clarify it very well for me when you said making sure that the actions that they're going to be focused on for the next quarter are in alignment with that 1-year vision that they identified on the onset of that year. So it kind of goes back to even a prior point that you made where everything kind of funnels and feeds to the next thing. So the weekly meetings, funnel up to the 90-day meetings, funnel up to the 1-year vision, funnel up to the 3-year, the 10-year, so on and so forth. So that helped clarify. Thank you.
And I'll give you one other quick one, David. I mean, we have senior advisors that are more tenured and more junior advisors. And so one of the things that they might have as a goal for the year is to transition, let's just say 30 clients, right? 30 sort of B clients. One of the rocks could be to make sure in the next 90 days, you get 7 of those clients or 10 of those clients transition to the new advisor. Very much things that an advisor in their job should be doing, but just drawing that attention, that focus to it, I think brings more accountability. So yeah, the meeting with clients, probably a watered down example. Hopefully the others we talked through are a little bit more tangible, a little bit more outside of that 1-year vision.
All right. Thanks for going back and forth and clarifying for me.
That was great.
You mentioned, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes ago or so, that where EOS maybe lacks is on the strategy, I think you mentioned. Help me understand that some more. And then I got a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think as we've talked about EOS, what's strongest is in operating the business, executing the business. I think most people, or Gino Wickman that wrote the book, I think would be the first to admit it's not really a strategy tool. And so For an organization our size, we're trying to be really intentional about what does the marketplace look like, both from our competition perspective in terms of consumer needs, and how should that inform like how we anticipate winning and whatever winning being defined as. And so EOS doesn't have a great system or process for sort of distilling out the input from the marketplace and from clients and competitors and trying to figure out, okay, where's our white space? Like, where can we differentiate? How can we win? And so we've actually used a tool. It's called Playing to Win. It's a Harvard Business School framework. If you just Google it, you should be able to find it. It's really simple. And it basically just answers 5 questions. Let's see if I can remember them. What's our winning aspiration? Where will we play, right? So do we want to differentiate into a niche, into a geography? How will we win? So kind of what's going to be unique about us. And then I think the last 2 are like, what capabilities and what systems do we need? And so that's actually a framework we've kind of used ahead of EOS to come up with our strategic plan, transition that into the VTO or the Vision Traction Organizer, which is sort of the EOS 2-page document, and then translating into, rocks and L10s and things like that.
Cool. Well, you anticipated my second question. My question was going to be, how do you solve for the strategy gap that is present? And would you say it was play to win?
Play to win. Yeah, there's a good book out there. Again, it's really simple. It's those 5 questions essentially. And I think it just sort of preempts the operating plan, which is kind of what the 1-page plan part of EOS is, and just helps businesses think strategically about, do I niche? Do I stay in my local geography? And then if that's my vision, like how do I get from point A to point B? Something we probably used for about the last 3 years, I think has been really helpful. We just do that once a year. And then we obviously use EOS throughout the year.
Cool. So I had another client who, and by the way, he's since implemented EOS, it's going well, all that type of stuff. But some of the things that he brought up at the beginning, one of which is, I'm fearful that people like employees will either not be receptive to having this structure or interpret it as the business is in shambles and we need to fix it, which his business was certainly not. That it was not that case, but he didn't want it to be interpreted that way and wanted to make sure it was received as, hey, this is how we're going to further enhance and grow the business. So do you ever have, teammates that maybe they're newer to the firm, they get plugged into the system where maybe you struggle to get their buy-in? And if so, how do you accomplish that?
And just a point of clarification, buy-in in terms of using EOS, I think is what you're asking. Yeah, I think, we're fortunate at this point because we've used it for over a decade and because we have so many people that are basically ingrained in it. I would say that's not a huge problem for us. I think what's a challenge is EOS is a language in a sense, right? And so people will throw things around like L10s or drop down in a meeting or all these different sort of terms that the average person has no idea what they mean because they probably haven't read the book. And so I think for us, it's more of a training and an onboarding thing, less about getting people on board. Because if you're not willing to get on board, like that's how we operate our business. So you're probably just not a right person, which is again, EOS language. So that hasn't been an issue so much as the training. And then I would say the last part that's been an issue with newer team members is bringing on new leaders. So when we have leaders come on from the outside, as I alluded to, it's even more challenging for them because it's one thing to sit in an L10 and just observe and learn some of the lingo and just be a participant. It's a whole nother beast when you come in from the outside, have to be a leader now running a quarterly or an L10. Because there's just so much nuance to like how you do it, how you facilitate. And so that's where I think, getting some good training, maybe bringing in a facilitator to help lead the first couple, just so you can see it in action. Those would be things that you could think of.
Cool. So before we pivot here slightly, if I'm an advisor, regardless of the size, right? Mm-hmm. Whether I got, 40 million in management or 15 billion in management or somewhere in between. And I think most people have at least heard about EOS and the book Traction. Perhaps they even thought about implementing it, but for one reason or another, they just haven't done it. What would you say to them to kind of get them over the fence?
I can't honestly say enough good things about how I think it can transform advisory businesses. It's been amazing to me. I wrote an article for kidsness.com about 4 years ago, maybe on EOS. And it's just amazing between now and then, like the number of firms that I will hear, they'll be like, oh yeah, we just started using it. It's great. I mean, it's really built for firms, financial advisory firms in a sense, right? Small businesses I think we're starting to maybe outgrow it on the upper end at 600 employees, but I think anywhere from like 2 to maybe, let's just call it a couple hundred people, I think it's amazing. So I can't pitch it enough. I don't get paid for saying that. I just really believe in the system because I've seen it work, right? I've lived in a world not using it. I've lived in the world using it. To be clear, it's not perfect. And we just talked about strategy, like that's a shortcoming. There's others. But I think for financial advisory businesses, I do really think it can move the needle in terms of helping them just get their business to where they want to go and get clear about, ultimately what they want that to look like.
Well, I appreciate you sharing and diving deep into some of that stuff, also being receptive to some of my pushback as well. It helps with my clarity. But I do want to pivot. So for those of you who this may be your first time listening to our show, one of the things that we ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. I think we can all agree that one of those books is Traction, but Matt came prepared with another book as well. And the point of this is just to try and distill a reading list for everyone listening. So you're not sifting through, oh, is this a good book? Is that a good book? You're getting recommendations, from the guests that we have. So the book that you chose is The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger. I don't think I've come across that book before. But what can you tell me about that in terms of why you picked it and the impact that it's had on your everyday life?
Yeah, so it was written, as you mentioned, by Bob Iger. For any of those that went to Schwab Impact here in Denver recently, he actually spoke. So it was really fun to hear him speak. Actually, he's now back to being Disney's CEO.
Oh, yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
He was retired and then, got brought back. So I think the book, a couple of things that stood out to me. I think if you read a lot of leadership books or biographies from CEOs, they tend to have a little bit of hubris to them. Oftentimes it's basically how great I am. And I think one of the things that struck me with Bob's book was just really the humility that he showed in terms of his shortcomings, in terms of his leadership journey, how he developed and just the hard lessons learned. And just some of the really, really difficult things that a leader at an organization the size of Disney internationally has to deal with. And so I think just the transparency in that was helpful, as I continue my leadership journey. And I think the other thing that I appreciated, and this is kind of something Steve Jobs once talked about, is you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can generally only connect how certain situations may have impacted your career in hindsight. And so he shared his whole journey from basically, entry level up through CEO. And I think that was, it's really interesting to see. And frankly, probably gave me a little bit more grace for myself sometimes when you're like, oh, this isn't working, or there's a lot of highs and lows in any of our careers. So I really appreciated that about the book.
You experienced what I'm about to say. I want to emphasize it because when I first became an advisor, probably the first, 4 or 5 years, everything that I consumed was industry related, be it books or podcasts, white papers, articles, blogs, all that type of stuff. And I found myself just absorbing all of that information, which I still think is valuable. But the impact that this book had on you and your journey has nothing to do with financial services. You even brought up, Steve Jobs as well. Like there's plenty of other people, companies, industries, etc., where you can take some of their life lessons and things that they've learned and apply it to your business. And quite frankly, I think as much as I love the financial services industry, I feel like other industries do some things that are a lot better than what we do. So let's go and, borrow those ideas and implement into ours as well. So you didn't say that directly, but I took that away from your overview that there's plenty to learn outside of our industry that can then be brought back into the industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And he shares a couple stories about some of the acquisitions they did with Pixar and whatnot. And so just given sort of the M&A themes and trends we're seeing in our space, there's some interesting parallels and just definitely lessons learned. So I highly recommend the book. It's an easy read. I think it was a New York Times bestseller, so definitely a good one.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I appreciate you joining. If I'm listening to this and I'd like to connect with you, maybe talk about EOS. I know you mentioned that you've done some M&A in the past as well. So perhaps I'm interested in learning more about BerganKDV. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah. Always happy to chat. You can email me. It's matt.cosgriff@bergankdv.com. Probably the easier way to find me is just on LinkedIn. So it's just my name. And again, the firm's BerganKDV. So happy to talk anything and all things EOS if helpful. So don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of assistance.
Awesome. And also keep in mind that Matt mentioned that I'm sure if you Google Matt Cosgriff, EOS, Kitsis, you can find the write-up that he did as well. Definitely check that out. And in the meantime, appreciate everyone joining and Matt, again, thanks for being proactive and reaching out. And it's been fun getting to know you so far.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David, for having me, and look forward to hopefully getting to shake hands in person sometime soon.
Awesome. Take care.
Thanks.